Jay looked at me and he said, "Hey, there ain't no fundraiser here. These guys are here to kill us. Don't move. Stay here." Unfortunately, I would never see Jay alive again after that. So I unholstered my Glock and I stuck my head out around this steel trailer door. And when I did, it just got riddled with bullets. And then I look over to the left, fire a couple more rounds, and I can see my brother's feet. And I can see one of his hands is convulsing. Mm-hmm. This is the beginning of that gunfight. And at this point, all I can think of is that somebody knocked Jay out. As impossible as that was for me to fathom. So it's me and 7 guys shooting back and forth. All I want to do is get to my brother. And I'm yelling at him, "I just want to get to my brother. Stop shooting." And every time I try to advance, they just let me have it, man. I finally got to him once, and I pushed a little harder than I should have. And I just kept unloading rounds as I'm moving forward, got a hold of him. And my brother was a big dude, man. I grabbed a hold of him, and I couldn't move him. And
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode of Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. I'm your host, Murph. Thank you so much for coming back. If you're new here, if you're listening to this on audio, do me a favor and run over to YouTube, type in Game of Crimes Podcast in the search bar. When the show pops up, hit that subscribe button, check out some of the episodes, hit the like button, and send me your comments. If they're ugly, I'll probably delete them, but you can send them anyway. But truly, I really, really appreciate you folks coming back every week. We're now into our 5th year of Game of Crimes. Man, when this first started, I didn't think we'd make it through the first year, to be quite honest with you. But having a blast, and there's no plans whatsoever to end the show anytime that I'm aware of, probably until Murph falls out of this chair dead. But just a pleasure to have you come back every week. And as you know, occasionally I will bring on a guest here who, for lack of better words, might have walked on the other side of that thin blue line that we call that in law enforcement. And that's today's guest. So he's a registered member of the Cherokee Tribal Nation. He's a Cherokee Indian. He's a former tribal police officer for about 6-7 years. But then he's also a former member of the Vagos Outlaw motorcycle gang. So we've got a lot of things crisscrossing here today to talk about and get straightened out. But it's my pleasure to welcome Malachi Seaman. Malachi, thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome to Game of Crimes.
Hey, Murph. Really appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. And thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. You might be wondering how we met, because he lives out on the West Coast. I'm an East Coast guy here in Orlando. Never have lived past the Mississippi. But as you guys know, every year I go out and support the Southern California Game Conference. I'm rocking their colors again this week. I'm an honorary board member for this conference out there. I think I've been out there 7 or 8 years now. Just love it. And I get to be on the board with guys like Joe Pistone, the retired FBI agent, Billy Queen, retired ATF agent. Just some fantastic people down there. Mel and Santi, love you guys. But this year we were doing a leadership thing, little breakout session, and I met a guy named Jeff Viles. Now, Jeff's a police officer in Bullhead, Arizona. We got to talk and kind of got to be friends. And we may have met before, but just when we all get older, we suffer from CRS. So Jeff got to talking, and turns out he's a longtime listener of the Game of Crimes. Jeff, thank you very much for that. And he said, there's a guy that I'm really, really close friends with that I think would be great for your show. And so I'm thinking, yeah, okay, another probably got some good stories. And then he starts telling me about Malachi, and I'm thinking, okay, what's wrong with this story? We got a gang police officer here who's best friends with the former Vagos president. So he started telling me a little bit about Malachi's story, and I said, you know what? That'd be fantastic to have him on the show. I think Jeff reached out to you. You didn't hesitate. We got in contact with each other, and here we are today, man. So thanks to Jeff for bringing Malachi to my attention. And Malachi, thank you for agreeing to be on the show here. It's I've told him at the beginning, if there's anything he doesn't want to talk about, we won't talk about it. But he said everything's on the table. So I'm about ready to go. You ready, Malachi?
Yeah, let's get it.
All right, mister. So what we do with most of our guests is just ask a little bit about your background to get things started. Where you grew up, what your family dynamics were, brothers and sisters, what mom and dad do. Did you make it through high school? Did you go to college? Did you play sports? Any of that kind of stuff.
Okay, so I was born in Caldwell, Idaho. I am the second oldest out of 8 children.
Wow.
4 brothers, 4 sisters. I basically moved to Washington State when I was still a baby, and I pretty much grew up we lived all over Washington, Bremerton, Tacoma, My father was in the Navy, and he was, when I was a young man growing up in Washington State, he was he was the president of the Vietnam Vets Motorcycle Club in Olympia, Washington. And so a lot of the things that I still have instilled in myself today are things that I learned from my dad's brothers. Those guys were, I mean, I'm still in touch with a few of them that are still alive. My dad's 80, so the Vietnam vets are dying off. But just the war stories and the uniforms, and they would always give us their fatigues and just a lot of the things that I learned as a young man, like my ethics, how I live by, how I keep my word, the things that I've taught my children are things that I learned from my dad and my brothers. My father has been and always will be my best friend, and we've been through hell and back together.
And not to interrupt you, but are your mom and dad both Cherokee?
The Cherokee comes from my dad's side.
Okay.
And so I'm just a Cherokee, full-blooded Cherokee Indians call me a nosebleed. So I'm just a very small, but there's some benefits there, and I'm proud of my heritage. Yeah.
Did you ever live on a tribal reservation?
No, never have.
Okay.
I've been to the doctor. That's something that the Cherokee Nation endorses for you no matter how much percentage you are. So you get, like my children and myself get benefits, medical benefits. So.
Okay. So how did your family move to Washington? What was the attraction there from Idaho?
So my parents were kind of like hippies, I guess, for the lack of a better word.
Okay.
We lived in a bus for quite a few years when I was a young man that my dad had converted into a motorhome. My mother homeschooled all of us children. And we just moved around a lot. We moved all over, and then we had a lot of consistency in Washington because my dad was part of that motorcycle club. And I want to say around like 1980, probably a few years after Mount St. Helens blew up. So I think that was in 80. So around 84, 85, my parents decided to move to Arizona. And my dad had got out of the motorcycle club, which was, it was pretty much my life being around those guys all the time. And so that was a big thing. I remember when my dad told me that it was over with, and I was like, pretty devastated because that was just something, I just couldn't understand how I was just going to miss all these guys, and their wives and just all that kind of stuff. So it was a culture shock to move from there to Arizona.
And you say club, so it's we being in law enforcement, we look at motorcycle clubs and outlaw motorcycle gangs. This was a real club. I mean, it wasn't any gang affiliation.
To me, to what I see, what I know now, because I consider myself a gang expert. I consider myself an expert in not just on the Vagos, but this is what I do for a living. I watch these guys. I put videos together, and I currently teach law enforcement about the dangers. But I kind of look at that like the golden age of bikers. It's long time gone. I think that's what would later on drive me into several different capacities in my life, was looking for that brotherhood, looking for that unity, that loyalty that I witnessed as a young man with my father, how he was treated, how our family was treated. And unfortunately for me, Murph, that doesn't exist in this day and age anymore.
I'm sitting here thinking back to my childhood as you're talking, and, I got interested in the cops when I was really, really young. I had my first run-in with the cops at 10 years old and trying to break in a house. That's back when law enforcement had discretion to take you home to your parents, which was probably worse than going to prison, to be quite honest with you. But I think, too, through that experience and watching TV shows about law enforcement and seeing that camaraderie and the brotherhood, I think that had a lot to do with why I joined the cops, whereas you were seeing that brotherhood within the motorcycle club.
Yeah.
It's not that much different. No,
the dynamics are very, very much the same. I have a lot of conversations with officers now that I am in the capacity that I am. And we always talk about that, how the criminal element, the veterans, the tier 1 operators, or just infantry guys, and law enforcement, they're all a few degrees off of each other, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's why they call it the thin blue line, because I know I was capable of going to the left side of that line as to the right side, and a lot of my friends and colleagues could have done that as well.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, and we could have conversations for hours over it. Absolutely.
Yeah, It's a very interesting dynamic. And just the fact that I was a cop for 38 years and I'm sitting here talking to you who you were a member of an outlaw motorcycle gang for a number of years, it just shows you how the dynamics and priorities, I guess would be another good word to throw in there, can change as we get older. The whole point of Game of Crimes is to show the bravery, the sacrifice, the commitment, the perseverance that's involved with law enforcement, first responders, and military. But it's the same when we bring a former bad guy, is how I mean that as a derogatory term for you, but we get a look at that other side of that thin blue line to hear your thoughts about. I read a couple things as I was doing some research on you, and a couple articles where the Vagos other members are talking about, and not just the Vagos. We've had HAs and other people on here as well, where they talk about the police always harassing them and locking them up for just petty charge. But there's a reason that's done from the law enforcement point of view. Of course, the guys on your side are not going to agree with that, I'm sure, but just trying to find as much information you can about the different clubs, and that's just simply one way to do it. And if there's a violation there, you use the law to help you further your investigations. I don't know how I got off on that, but.
Well, I'll just comment, very quickly, and Jeff will get a kick out of this, but, when I was president of the Vagos in Arizona and I was, running amok and doing my thing, and, we talk about it all the time when we're doing conferences together about how frustrating it was for him,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what he went back to, how he finally got his, got a grip on me was through conventional law enforcement tactics, hanging paper, stopping me for, that's how he finally got me. So, I mean, you have to do what works. I was really good at what I did because of my law enforcement background. It made me a better criminal. It made me more aware of what you guys were doing. And I was able to, sidestep those things, knowing what I knew, with the, experience that I had prior to joining the Vagos motorcycle gang.
It's just like in sports, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, or competition shooting or whatever it is, when things aren't working, you always go back to the fundamentals. It's that basic and it's that simple. I know a lot of times in law enforcement, we tend to outthink ourselves.
Yeah.
That's when you have to go back to the basics, but we'll get on into all that in just a minute. I got to ask you about, were there 8 kids and 2 adults traveling around in that bus?
Yes. So,
oh my God.
My mom and dad, I loved them with all my heart, and I might get a little emotional here, but
that's okay.
My dad, he's my hero. He has, he's always been there for me. I know I've fallen short of being a good son sometimes, especially with some of the things we're going to talk about. But I tell people when they're like, how did you get into this or that? How could you live through losing your brother? And I just was like, all you guys can see in these videos and stuff without talking to me personally is, you can only see the choices I made. You didn't get to see the choices that I had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But back to my parents. So we had 4 boys, 4 girls, and my parents I'm at my parents' beck and call all the time, because my parents lost 4 children out of 8, and they lost 3 children tragically. So my youngest sister, Sarai, because of RH blood factor, which was something that is not a big deal, but back when she was born, in the early 80s it was, and she only lived for about 15 minutes.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And then my oldest sister was hit by a car when she was 16 years old. I was, I think, 8 at the time, and she was killed. And then my brother Butch, he's my older half-brother, but about a year before Japheth was murdered, he was intoxicated, sitting in bed eating, and he choked to death.
Goodness.
And so my parents, God bless them, have been through it. And then with, Japheth was, it was just something you don't ever get over, man.
And we'll get into his circumstances here in just a little bit, if that's okay. There's another commonality. There was my sister who's 8 years older than me, but there was a brother that we had, Tommy, between her and me. And I think he lived till almost 3 years old before he passed away. He had water on the brain.
Yeah.
Which back then they didn't have the capability like they have today to run the tubes down and the drainage and all that stuff. And they were taking him to Cleveland Hospital for treatment. But the reason I mention that is because my whole life I have never seen my mom or my dad shed a tear. And my dad was a Southern Baptist minister. He would listen to people's tales of woe and physical, mental issues they're going through and health issues and everything, the hardships that people go through. And just, I guess, I don't know about your mom and dad, but I guess it hardens them to a point where it maybe hardens their emotion. I'm sure it doesn't harden their hearts.
Yeah.
But it does harden their emotions, because you're talking about getting emotional. I'll get emotional. If you start crying, I'll start crying. I'll tell you that right now, because it's the older I get, the more emotional I am. I don't understand that, but so there's a lot of commonalities here, which I kind of enjoy exploring this a little bit. Where did you go to high school? Were you in Washington then?
No, we moved to Arizona.
Okay.
So we spent a little time in New Mexico, and then when we left Washington State, and a little time over in Silver City and Alamogordo, and that's where my sister Desiree got killed. And then after that, we moved to Arizona. And I think when we moved, let's see, I would have been 10. Yeah. We moved there, and we actually stayed on the Quashon Indian Reservation for a couple of months in a bus. And my dad had a Harley still. And he would go into town and get us things that we needed and stuff. And I guess at one point he needed something for his motorcycle. And he stopped at a motorcycle shop called Demented Custom Cycles. And the owner, a guy named Emmett Sorensen, just really took a liking to my dad. And Emmett's dead now, rest in peace. But that man told my dad, I want you to come to work for me, because he saw my dad had a really beautiful shovel head. And my dad said, well, I got a bus and kids, and this is where we're at. And I'll never forget my dad showing up, and Emmett was with him, and we loaded everything up and went to town. My mom and dad rented a house where we would, pretty much grow up, and sold the bus. And my dad went to work for the bike shop. So kind of like the old Washington feel, a lot of bikers and some really good people. My mom was also working at the shop, and we started growing up in Yuma, but she was still homeschooling us. I tried to go to Yuma High for a little bit, and it just wasn't a good fit for me. And so I started boxing. Me and my brothers started boxing with a local boxer named Sandy Salisbury, who would marry one of my cousins and have children with them. I think he's currently in prison right now, but so I love boxing. That's what I started doing at a very young age. A little bit of Golden Gloves, a little bit of just all amateur stuff, but had a really good time doing it. And growing up in Yuma in the 1990s, man, I always tell everybody, if you didn't grow up in Yuma in the 90s, you're not shit.
It's pretty tough, huh?
And it was just a good time, man. We had a lot of good friends. My dad had the bike shop, and then I think it was 1990. My dad and all the guys from Demented went to Sturgis, and then what would later be found out was that Emmett all his money wasn't honest. I would say that, and he would get arrested, and the shop would get shut down. Then my dad and my Uncle Brett would open another motorcycle shop called B&B Custom Cycles. And in fact, I was just watching, I was showing my kids the video of them hanging the sign. I had found some old VHS tapes and started watching them. And so it was good. I got my first vehicle. My sister got a Camaro. She worked at Taco Bell and Ronnie's Pizza. And it's a great little pizza place I still go to when I go to Yuma. I got my first little Chevy pickup truck, and me and my dad turned it into a lowrider, and Yuma was just great. Lots of friends, and as a boxer, I had a pretty good reputation for people not wanting to mess with me, and so I was telling my kids, 4th Avenue is like one of the main drags through town. So on Friday nights when you went to go cruising, if you wanted to go hang out with your girl and there'd be no drama, then you would go to Del Taco, which is on one side of the 4th Avenue. But then if you had some business to handle with somebody that was talking trash or whatever, then you would go to Carl's Jr. And that's where a lot of differences were handled in Yuma when I was growing up. Go handle it but it was a great time, man. It was a great time growing up. Just wonderful memories. I'm a big, if you can't tell behind me, I'm a big aviation fan, especially naval aviation. And always wanted to be a pilot when I was a kid. And growing up in Yuma, the Marine Corps Air Station, the air show, a lot of Marine friends, and started riding crotch rockets. And I was the outcast from my dad's shop. My brother Jay, he built his first Sportster when he was like 16, bought a CBR 600. He'd tell my dad, Malachi can't park his bike in front of the shop. This is a motorcycle shop.
He didn't like those foreign
No,
jobs.
my own brother, right? And he'd come out one day and he saw, Malachi, your bike's leaking oil. I'm like, what? I go out and he had ripped a bag of rice and threw it all over underneath the bike. And so that was Jay. He always hated crotch rock because he was a Harley guy, man. Yeah.
That's the better than I do. That's the history, but it's either Harley or nothing for those kind of people.
That's right.
I'm surprised your dad didn't kick you out. Boy,
no,
what's wrong with you?
Yeah. He knew we were all just different personalities.
Did you end up getting a GED, or how'd that work?
So I did. So fast forward to, I pretty much just never had a GED. It's one of the things that kept me from getting a full-time position at the police department. But yeah, I never did. I'm just one of those guys that's pretty well-rounded, very knowledgeable. I've always read a lot, and if I didn't know how to do something, I would learn how to do it. My dad taught me how to use my hands when I was a young man. So I'm very handy around the house and cars. I'm a master certified Harley tech because I got really good into Harleys once I became a Vago and we had our own shop. Mm-hmm. But no, interestingly enough, when my brother got murdered and I caught a case, I understood at that point that I needed to stay out of trouble if I was going to be victorious in this fight. Mm-hmm. And so I went down and applied for the community college in New Mexico, and I took my GED and passed it. And then while I was fighting my case for 2 years, I got degrees in culinary arts and cooking and baking.
Wow.
Because I love to cook. So how old was I? Almost 40 years old when I got my GED.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, you pursued it and you won that battle. Hearing what your majors were in college, though, that's not what I would expect from an outlaw motorcycle gang member. Did you catch any grief from your brothers over that?
No, it was an interesting time, which we can get into. But after Jay's murder, man, there was a lot of things that changed for me, and which we can get into a little bit later. But when I beat my case, I was literally, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie 300, but when I beat my case and got activated back into the Vagos, I was looking for banditos to be stacked up like that wall of dead bodies in 300. That's what I wanted. That's what I expected the big bad Vagos to have laid at my feet. And like I said, once we get further in the story, we can explain how that was.
Yeah. All right. I want to ask you about that Emmett that your dad was working for. Was he a member of a motorcycle gang?
He wasn't. So he was a big 81 supporter. He supported the Hells Angels in many different ways. And I still have, let me see if I can turn this camera real quick. I would open Demented Custom Cycles. Mm-hmm. And that's the logo that Emmett had with the lightning bolts on it. I would open that myself later on. But Emmett was he was a hard worker, worked hard, played hard, and he sold me my first shovel head, man. He sold me my first Harley. I still have it today. And he was a great friend of our family. Throughout his lifetime, because I even moved back to Yuma at one point after the police department didn't go through. I was just in a really distraught frame of mind. And I remember telling myself that if I wasn't good enough to be one of the good guys, that I sure as hell had the stock to be a bad guy. And I went to Yuma. I went to work with Emmett at Gowan Milling at a fertilizer plant. It's a pretty interesting job. And we just drank and worked on bikes. And I moved back to Bullhead City, and Emmett had a heart attack at work. Couple of years after that, he would come once we had the shop open in Bullhead. He would take off Harley weekend, which was a big deal in Laughlin, and he would come up and mechanic beside me, and it was just a great weekend back when it was really big before the shootings, and we would make $100,000 in a week.
Wow!
And he was just a great man, somebody that I miss dearly, and very influential in my life growing up. And well, he was alive when I patched in with the Vagos, and he wouldn't even speak to me.
Really? So he knew that wasn't good for you.
Yeah. And I was broke up with my wife, and I took a girl over to his house on his bike that I was borrowing. And he had three patch holders from the Hells Angels in his garage, and they were all drinking. And so I don't even think I've ever told anybody the story, but
Hey, it's a first here on Game of Crimes.
One of the guys thought he was going to take my old lady, and he was a Hell's Angel, and it wasn't going to happen. And so I got the boots put to me pretty good by the three of them, and went out, got on the bike, and got her, took her home. And I wasn't too happy about that. That was pretty much the end of our. I wasn't mad at Emmett because I understood what could he do. They'd have just kicked him too. And but a couple days later, it's when he took his bike away from me. I was not pleased, kind of limping around. My pride was hurt, and I pulled up at this bar called Crazy Earl's, and I saw Hell's Angel Prospect sitting in the at the bar. So I left my bike running, walked in, walked up to the bartender, ordered a shot and a beer, took the shot, drank one drink out of the beer, and turned around, and I'm left-handed, and I just assholed this Prospect off the back of his, and knocked him out cold, and walked out, got on my bike, and left. And I felt pretty like I got a little get back,
Mm-hmm.
By the time I got home, Emmett was already in the driveway, and he was so mad. Everybody knew who I was. They knew his bike, and he took the bike away, and I left Yuma shortly after that.
Wow. No, you didn't get arrested over it, and there was no payback from the HAs?
No. We would go back and forth not over that incident. I don't think anybody ever placed me, but I wasn't a Vago then. I didn't understand the dynamics of what could have happened, because I hadn't really seen that around my dad. I hadn't seen that. I think the worst situation in Washington was the Gypsy Jokers didn't like Vietnam vets. And so, interestingly enough, there was a guy named Irish Chris who ran, I just remember his name as a kid, who ran the Jokers, and him and my dad always respected each other, and they could handle or defuse situations face to face. And never got to meet the dude. Once I became a Vago, I actually ran into a couple of Jokers on a trip I was on, and I asked about him, but they said he wasn't alive anymore.
Wow. So when you finished your education, I guess, and was there something you did between turning 18 and then joining the tribal police?
So, yeah, when I left Yuma and I moved to Bullhead City, I was staying with my parents, and my mom was a waitress at the Riverside Resort. I went to work. I asked her if I could go to work. And she's like, yeah, there's plenty of jobs. You can go do whatever you want. So I applied. I think I got hired in the pantry of all places. So that was like cutting vegetables, and I did that for a little while, and then they put me as a busser in the restaurant with my mom. That was kind of cool to work with Mom. And then you'd be in the casino around everybody. And one day, one of the security guards was like, hey, you should come and work in security. And it's more money and whatever. And you can work the nightclub and work in the pit. And so I did. I got transferred to security, and I liked it. It was all right. That was really my first, as an adult, that was like my first experience, like working around police officers, like Las Vegas Metro. You work with them. Before that, it had always been getting in trouble, and either Yuma Police Department or the Yuma County Sheriff's, and they'd have me in a cell, and they're like, all right, let's take Seaman home. And I'm like, please just book me on something. Please don't take me home. Because
I know.
Yeah, there wasn't anybody more scary than my father when I was growing up, and if he was mad. So then when I started working in security, you would trespass people, and there was just a lot of instances where we would work hand in hand with the police department. And then I dealt cards for a while, because then I met a couple of people in the pit, and they were just like, bro, want to make some real money? So I broke in at the Riverside dealing like single deck blackjack, roulette, craps, and that was a good time of my life, man. That was good money. Not to backtrack, but my mom got me a job at the Stargate movie set in Yuma. They were filming out there. That was actually the best money. That was some really good money when I was a kid. You were making like $3,000 a week.
Wow.
And yeah, in the 90s, it was pretty interesting. But
what were you doing? Just security?
So no, believe it or not, it was so funny because me and one of my best friend at the time, Nico Ellison, we both got hired, and we went out there, and they gave us a 5-gallon igloo with the straps on it, and you had to mix Gatorade in it, and then it had a little hose with a little spigot.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have to go out and walk these lines in 120 degrees and water all the extras to keep them hydrated. And you had to carry pins. You had a big rubber band of like 50 ballpoint pins, big pins. And if somebody like fell out with a heat stroke, you'd stick a pin in their mouth and you get on your radio and call the paramedics. But it was a very common occurrence for people to. So after 30 days of that, I was like, me and Nico rolled in and we would go into work at like 5 a.m. And I'm like, bro, are you ready to go? And he's like, yeah, bro, we got to find something else to do. And about that time, I heard somebody call my name. So I walked up and there was a guy named Buzz Kramer and he ran craft services. And he said, you and this gentleman here, Nico, are the only guys with perfect attendance for the first 30 days of employment. Would you like to come to work for me? And he's like, the answer is yes. And I said, okay. And the dynamics changed immensely. We went from making minimum wage to making very good money.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did was we would just go shopping with a credit card for Kurt Russell, James Spader, all of the stars. We would go to them, get a list of what they wanted, and we would go fill that list and bring it to their trailers, and then we would drive them around from set to set in like dune buggies, and it was the greatest job to have then.
Well, back up a second. What does the ink pen have to do with somebody that's dehydrated?
If they're having a seizure so they don't bite their tongue off. So you stick the pin in their mouth.
Really?
It was interesting for me, too. I was like, what?
Was that cheaper than like a popsicle stick or something?
I guess, yeah. Or a wallet, because not everybody had their wallet. But it was a great time, man. I remember the first time I went to go get Kurt Russell to take him to I think we were working at Nagata City. And I pulled up, and I think I was 17, maybe almost 18. And so I was super excited. I'm a big Kurt Russell fan. Uh-huh. But my boss is like, hey, don't be starstruck. He's a normal person. Treat him as such. So yeah. I walked up. There was a bunch of guys standing there. And I don't know if you've seen the movie, but Kurt Russell had like a flat top and his hair was kind of blonde.
What was the movie?
Stargate.
I wasn't parts of it.
Yeah, it was like an all right movie. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was still a good flick. But anyway, so I walk up and I tap him on the shoulder and I'm like, hey, Mr. Russell, I'm Malachi Seaman. I'll be taking you to, and he turns around and the guy's like, and I'm looking at Kurt Russell and he's like, no, mate, he's over there. And it was his stand-in that looked exactly like him.
Wow.
And so there was 3 of them. Now, one of the guys I could tell wasn't Kurt Russell, but his stand-in was so like the only way I could tell them apart, unless I was talking to them, was Kurt Russell's, when they dyed his hair, it was a little orange. So his tint, so that's how I was able to just decipher who was who and pick up the right guy.
You hear all these horror stories about movie stars. Were the guys that you were dealing with, were they pretty decent to you?
Everybody was very respectful. James Spader, I wasn't a big fan of because he was not always that way. He would expect fresh squeezed guava juice. One day he asked me for that at like 4:00 in the morning. And I was like, okay, here's a Kern's Nectar from Circle K.
That wasn't good enough.
Goldie Hawn, I got to spend probably more time, a lot of time with her, and she was just wonderful. I loved him. I like to make people laugh, and she has such a amazing laugh. But they were great people. Kurt Russell, I was a nobody, but he was always very nice to me. So.
That's good to hear.
It was a great experience, man. Growing up, like I said, if you didn't grow up in Yuma in the 90s, bro.
I like that saying. I should put that on the T-shirt.
That's right.
That might be a future business for you. You never know. So how did that translate into you going to the tribal police then? And which tribe was it?
So it was the Fort Mojave Tribal Police. So my sister Rachel married one of those tribal members. They're not married anymore, but a couple of my nephews are from that tribe. And that's the local tribe out there. I met Donald Crane, and he was somebody I met in security. And we rode bikes together. And then one day I saw him in a police car. And I was like, dude, when did you become a cop? And he's like, bro, you should come down. They're hiring, blah, blah, blah. And I was looking for that next step in my life. And I'd worked in security. And I'm a protector by trade. Like my dad raised me that way. I still do that today. Like I stop and help people, man. And so I went down to the police department, filled out an application. Ron Pose was the chief of police at the time. And what I didn't know is Donnie didn't have the greatest reputation as a police officer.
Okay.
So on his recommendation, the chief kind of was like...
He wasn't too impressed.
No. But so I went through the hiring process, and he said that they had just picked up their 2 new officers for the year, for that fiscal year. And how it worked was more like a year and a half to 2 years, they would get grants for 2 more police officers. So he explained that to me up front the first time. He was like, look, we've got an opportunity. I can bring you in. I'll swear you in. You can work under these guys' posts, okay? And you can learn. and you can see if it's truly something you have a passion for. It's going to be reserve time. There's no pay. It's 8 hours a month. It's up to you. And I was like, absolutely, I'm interested. So I went through everything. I remember I had to buy my trousers, and they wear those Smokey the Bear hats. And I had to purchase those. So that was kind of a little off-putting, but I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And then a funny thing happened is I met the rest of the guys. So fell in love with my corporal right away. He was just a stand-up dude. His name was Ray Lamone. He was a former operator. He was a ranger in the Army, decorated in combat, Somalia, Desert Storm, and he was my idol, dude. He was squared away. His uniform was pressed. He was just the perfect example of a police officer, and he was squared away, and he was all about getting guys squared away.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there was Tim Yazzie, who was like a DUI guy. Robert Arison is another guy that I really took a liking to. So I just started working with him, and I actually stopped working my full-time job, and I was married at the time. My wife was working. We had a son named Bailey, and he was a baby. And I told her, this is what I want to do, and I need you to help support us while I do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked at like a 40-hour-a-week job. And
for no pay.
No pay. And anytime there was training, even though I wasn't post-certified, I would go to training. So firearms training, FATS training, HGN. I started doing a lot of DUIs with Yazzie, got very good at that, and just worked out all the time, great shape. And then Ray Lamone, like I said, was an operator, so he would defensive tactics, and just watching these guys riding along, going on the hot calls, learning how to drive vehicles correctly. It was just a great time in my life, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Ray was just like, dude, you're going to be the most squared away guy. When you go into that academy, he's like, these people are going to be like, where did this dude come from?
Yeah.
Because you're going to have so much experience, and experience a lot. Out in that area, you work with not Bullhead PD so much because it's so far away, but you work with Department of Public Safety, you work with Mojave County Sheriff's Department, and then part of the reservation is in Needles, California. So you work with San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. And then part of the reservation is also in Nevada. So you get to work with the Mojave tribe has a casino in Laughlin. So we would respond to that and deal with Las Vegas Metro also, because we would go book them in. Like if somebody committed a crime in Laughlin, we would transport them to I believe it was Tucker Holding Facility in Laughlin. And so we would have to, being an officer in that tribe, you had to be familiar with Arizona Revised Statute, California Revised Statute, and Nevada. It was a very interesting, I learned a lot, man. I got to be friends with all these guys in different departments. And then two other gentlemen who are just great operators. They were both sheriffs, a guy named Dave Belfield and a guy named Bodie Runston. They lateraled over to the tribe. And now all of a sudden we just had a great group of guys. And one of the interesting things with DUIs is because we had the casinos, there's a lot of DUIs. And as a tribal police officer, what we would learn is our grid, because on Highway 95, which is the main drag through those cities, it's checkerboarded with reservations. So what you would do as a tribal police officer, even though I'm in the car with a post-certified Arizona post-certified officer, we would pull them over so I can do my work on the reservation. So you would activate your lights and pull them over, time it so you get them pulled over on the reservation. And then if they're DUI, then you do your DUI investigation. And what you can do is you can give them a break. Instead of sending them through the state, it's a civil infraction between you and the tribe. So you take them down. If you get your cues for DUI, you make the arrest, take them down to the tribe, to the police department, let them blow on the intoxilizer. Then you cite them and release them. So it's no points on their license. So they get a slap on the wrist, right? The tribe gets their revenue for that, and that person gets a second chance at not screwing their life up. Yeah. But at the other hand, if it's an aggravated situation where somebody was hurt or something like that, then the post-certified officer does it the other way. So it was a very educational, 6 or almost 7 years doing that.
And why did you eventually leave? Did it have to do with your GED? Is that right? So
it had to do with that, and it had to do with some marijuana use from my younger age that was deemed to be more than experimental. Arizona post was very difficult. Very strict. And so what would happen was when the grant came up for the next 2 guys, I'd already chosen to go to the physical academy because they had Narda and Alita and Carlotta. Narda was like where Ray was like, you're going to Narda because it was more like a basic training in the Army. It was a lot of physicality based on where the other ones were more academic academies. And so I was, when it came time for those grants, I showed up. We had to do our oral boards and everything, and I didn't get chosen. And they chose a couple tribal members. And you have to understand at this point, I'm the most decorated reserve officer that they have.
Mm-hmm.
I drive my own unit. I can work in the reservation all by myself. I got Title IV certified because we had Sea-Doos in a boat. So I could do Title IV in the water and got passed up. And then a year and a half later, got passed up again. Then I started to make an argument about it and got called into the chief's office thinking that it was going to be that. And I can't put it all on Chief Foes, but there was an incident where me and Robert Harrison were off duty and we were at the river drinking. And I really think this was the catalyst of the chief not making a decision to hire me. But we got into an altercation with some of the tribal members on the beach, and I got attacked and punched, and then a couple of those guys got knocked unconscious and had to go to the hospital. And they were charged. I wasn't charged. But I think that was the big thing, honestly, dude, because I didn't know then, but I know now I could have got a waiver for the marijuana use. But I just straight got a termination letter. No, thank you. No, nothing. And it was a very devastating point in my life because I had the first 8 months or a year almost without working, but then it was difficult for my wife and my son needed daycare. So I started dealing cards and stuff again. But I remember Jeff and I have talked about it, and it was just a devastating part of my life. And we use that in the conference I teach. It was the catalyst for me slamming my fist down and saying, enough is enough. Like if these guys are saying I'm not good enough to be a good guy, well, then we'll go the other way with it.
It's interesting how you termed that encounter at the river where you got punched a few times and then a couple of them got knocked out. Did they knock each other out? Who knocked them out? I
did. Yeah, I was.
The statute of limitations has run out, so you can talk about it now.
I got in trouble because I didn't handcuff them, but I didn't have any handcuffs and they weren't going anywhere. And I just think the chief never thought that highly of me, but everything happens for a reason.
Yep. So, okay. So did you consciously say, if I can't be a good guy, I'm going to be a bad guy, meaning that you're going to go over to the criminal element, or? No,
I just used that, but I just meant that I was just going to embrace the motorcycle, business that my parents had.
Mm-hmm.
There had been some other things that were very, very good friend of mine, a guy named Kelly Turner, God rest his soul. He's a great deputy with Mojave County Sheriff's, killed himself. He was just a great dude, man. And there was a couple times we went to the Avi. The last time I saw him alive, I was working with Tim Yazzie. We went to Avi Casino. He was arguing with his old lady. We put him in the car, put him in the back, gave him a ride home. And a few days later, it broke my heart, man, because he was a good dude and we worked together all the time. He went in and got in a shower, got out, sat down on his couch, folded his towel over his head, and shot himself in the face. And that's how we found him. And it was horrible. And we had a shooting. Bodie Runston had shot a tribal member that was trying to kill him with a knife. And it was one of those things where he was running around the car a dozen times, and finally the dude caught up to him, and Bodie didn't have any choice. Bodie killed him, and Bodie got fired. And so there was a lot of leadership problems with that department. Mm-hmm. Ray took over as the police chief after I had left. And it was just, I guess, I don't know. I just had enough of the politics and the bullshit. And my dad was struggling with the motorcycle shop. Yeah. So, and I just walked away from it, disgruntled, obviously, and then just went, and started trying to make our business flourish in Arizona.
And did it?
It did. It did really well until my brother had problems with substance abuse, and that caused some problems with him and I. And then there was a deal that he did over a motorcycle, and this guy got an attorney, and they were going to sue us, and I just didn't know what to do at the time. So I went to the attorney and was like, hey, what's going on. And he explained everything, what they were going to do. And I said, can I have the weekend to think about it? And he said, yeah. And I knew that they had my brother dead to rights, and I wasn't going to let my family lose that business. So I took the weekend and got all my friends together, and we emptied the shop out. So when they came to do their thing, there wasn't anything there. And then I went to work for a chain of pawn shops there in Arizona. My sister actually still manages them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good job. Then my wife and I had our daughter, Janessa. Our deal was that if we had another child, her family was from New Mexico, that we would move there so our second child could be born there. And it wasn't too long later that she got pregnant with Elias, and that's what we did. We moved in 2009 to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I started working at a place called Unpainted Furniture. And Albuquerque was okay. I was drinking a lot then, and I decided my uncle had a sober living place, allegedly. And
it doesn't sound good.
Yeah, he's a used car salesman, and he's someone that's in the Vagos that I do not care for. I mean, I don't care for any of them, but he's a coward.
Was he in the gang back then?
He was.
Okay.
Actually, check this out. So he was actually in he was in the Vietnam vets with my father. His name is Quickie John, and John Juarez. John was okay. I always thought they called him Quickie John because he was fast, but it was because he liked to do crank, I guess. And he had a couple of cute daughters. But I remember Dave Jorgensen, who was one of my favorites, and spent a lot of time with him. Went back and saw him in Washington before he actually came to New Mexico and visited us right before Jay died. But he would always call Quickie the used car salesman. And he's like, watch that. He's a used car salesman, man. You can't trust him.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward all these years, I go to this place to get sober in Springfield, Missouri. And my uncle Quickie is running it, and he's a Vago, and I'm around all these Vagos all of a sudden. I know how to work on bikes, and I'm doing that. And it wasn't long that I got asked if I wanted to prospect, and I said yes. And so I started prospecting, and there was just a lot of going on there that I was very naive. And so Quickie pretty much told me that he ran the Vagos. And what I would come to find out later was that all of these members out there were, when I finally patched in, I'm like, hey, how long did you patch in? And the guy's like, oh, I prospected for a little while, and then I just gave him a scooter, and he gave me a patch. So there was a lot of that going on.
Wow.
And, but I should have known, hindsight's 20/20, but my first outing with the Vagos was Reno, Nevada, in the shootout at Sparks Casino, at Sparks, Nevada, at John Augustus Casino. I was prospecting in Albuquerque. That's where I lived. And so I got sober, started prospecting, and then I was traveling. That's 14 hours one way. Nobody ever was like, hey, bro, there's Mongols. There's, I had my Glock named Gladys that was always with me. So I was always armed. And I would get on my motorcycle and twice a month go attend church and, go spend money with the charter and do my prospect duties, and was very naive to the danger that was going on. And I ran into guys. I ran into banditos. I ran into Mongols, and they'd always ask me, did your P call? And I'm like, he absolutely did. His name's Tuck. He never called, man. And I'm just like, so anyways, the interesting thing about how Quickie was doing things, little used car salesman, was he was making patches without the knowledge of National. He was making center patches. He was making flash, rank patches, everything. And so, but all of this is kept inside the confines of Missouri. Mm-hmm. So if you're a California Vago, you don't know what's going on. And so all of these people, all of these Vagos, all of these prospects, hang around support clubs, they all think that Quickie's number one. And so a guy named Jester, who was a nomad that was living in Dallas, Fort Worth, called me and he said, hey, I'm going to Street Vibrations. You're going to go with me. So I said, okay. He's like, I'm on my way. All right. And so I was in Missouri at the time, and Quickie was like, you're not going. And I'm like, okay, but Jester wants me to go. So anyways, Jester talked to him. So we lit out and rode from Springfield, Missouri, all the way to Reno, Nevada. It was a good ride, man. I was stoked to be prospecting, to be a part of something. I really liked Jester. He's a big dude, but pretty savvy in what was going on. And so we get there, and it was interesting, man. It was the first time I had seen that many Vagos. And instantly, the minute I wasn't around Jester, 2 Vagos come up to me. One who is the National Sergeant Arms, guy named Dragon Man, whom I love dearly, man, comes up, and I hated this guy. He was such an asshole to me. He got my face, like his breath stunk, and he's just right in front of my face, and he's looking at my cut, and I had a warbird on my cut that I was given. And he's like, where did you get that? And I said, Quickie gave it to me. And he's like, that's an earn patch. What'd you do to earn it? And I said, well, I can't talk about that. And he's like, oh, good answer. And he's just looking at my cut, just, okay. And so I got treated very poorly by this guy. And I didn't understand why. And so we're just going around the casino, chopping it up. I'm just trying to be attentive and listen, but I'm getting dirty looks from like California guys, and Jester's like, hey, this is what's going on, man. And he's like, there's Hell's Angels across the freeway, and you have to understand that if something goes down, man, just make sure you get down. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy that doesn't do anything, because if that happens, it's going to be over for you after the dust settles. We were out walking all the venues and stuff. My adrenaline was running, man, because we never had any confrontations, but there was a couple times where there was a couple of prospects on the other side of the street, and it was a pissing contest, and we're just looking at each other. And then the night of the shooting, right before the shooting happened, Jester and I went to go get his wife from a tattoo convention, came back, and how it was set up was there's the casino, there's like a little walkway, and there's a parking structure. Mm-hmm. And I didn't go anywhere without a gun the entire time I was a Vago. I didn't care if I was in California. I don't care if I was in an officer's meeting. I was always packing. And that's something that I was taught, by my dad is don't be the only guy in the room that doesn't have a gun. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so that's something I always did. And it was against the rules, but I always went into an officer's meeting packing. And I was like, I'm going to have the upper hand in here no matter what you guys are up to. All the Vagos were on the 5th story of this parking structure. So we get back and we get off our bikes. I've got my Glock, but it's in the bottom of my saddlebags. And we start going down the elevator. And when the elevator door opens, we get about halfway across this walkway. And all of a sudden I hear what I know are gunshots, but they're muffled because the casino's closed. And about that time, the doors open to the casino. And people, like a movie, just come running out, screaming, and you can hear like active gunfire inside the casino. And Jester and I run in, and there's a couple of, I don't remember who the girls were, but they were national old ladies, I believe. And he grabbed them and his old lady and pushed them to me, and he said, lock down the parking garage. And so into the elevator we went, and I remember a police car came flying around the corner and hit the side of the casino, and the cop didn't miss a beat, jumped out, racked around in his AR, and into the casino he went. So I took these girls upstairs, his wife and these other girls, and retrieved my pistol, and we basically locked down that parking garage. And we kind of were able to see as the police started doing their job and handcuffing everybody. I remember seeing, I'm pretty sure it was Jeff Pettigrew that I saw from a distance, dead, on the floor. And it was just chaos, man. And then as the night progressed, retaliatory shootings started happening. And I remember at one point, Dragon Man was like, hey, everybody was told to take off anything that was green, put it in their saddlebags, and that we were all going to exit. We were going to leave.
Because the green is the color of the Vagos.
And people were getting shot off their bikes. There was like 3 or 4, if I remember correct, 3 or 4 other instances. And then I remember hearing this roar, and I saw probably at least 80 or 100 Hells Angels on the freeway coming into the city. And that was a sight, man. I mean, that'll make you pucker when you're on the other team. Mm-hmm. And so we all got organized and then were escorted out of town. It was just a crazy thing to be a part of. I'm in the back of the pack, and there's cops with lights, and they followed us all the way to the Utah line, and then Utah took it over from there. And I remember at that point, Quickie and some other guys that showed up, because I remember calling him from the parking garage, and I woke him up and I said, hey, you need to get downstairs, dude. There's been a shooting. And he was just like, he thought I was kidding. And I remember this nomad that used to think he was Mr. Tough Guy, a guy named Rocky, Cocky Rocky. I'm in this parking garage, so I've got a great view of all of these people. And I watched this dude, okay? I made up a phone number about it, and me and some other brothers, Little D, some guys, would joke about it later on. But this dude comes out, and you can tell he's like frazzled, right? Like he's scared, and he's looking around, and this dude takes his cut off, right? Which is a no-no. Folds it up and hides it under this bush. And I'm watching this dude do this, right? And I was like, what the hell is this dude doing? And some cops found it and took it, and it was a big deal. And then, of course, he lied about, trying to save face and didn't know that somebody witnessed him doing that, being dishonorable and being a coward, but he has to live with himself.
Was he a Vago?
He was nomad on top of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He was somebody that should have known better. But so then I told little D, I told him about it, and he was like, "Are you sure?" And I said, "I am sure. I'm 110% positive." And
that's another T-shirt.
That's right. Yeah. So it was interesting though. So and then every time we stopped in Utah to try to get a room, these guys were just like, "No, not interested." So we split up. I went with my P at the time, a guy named Yo. Too much Tomas. He used to always say yo all the time.
What is your P? What do you mean by that?
He was the president of the Missouri Charter at the time. And we rode back together. Probably one of the longest and uneventful rides I'd ever been on. So it was from Reno to Utah. A bunch of the guys stayed at the Ogden Clubhouse, but he had to get back. Tomas did. So we took off from there, and we went through Cheyenne, Wyoming, Colorado, and then he stayed in Colorado, and I rode back to Albuquerque by myself.
And I don't want to cut you short, but we've been going up well over an hour now, so I want to calling into this first episode. Okay. I know the time flies by because these stories are so interesting. But for ladies and gentlemen, there'll be a part 2 on this. So thank you for joining us for today. Malachi, thank you for these stories. I've still got a lot of questions about this story, especially about you carrying a weapon. But come back tomorrow, everyone, and join us. And thank you so much for coming to the Game of Crimes. We'll see y'all tomorrow.